My peace was shattered the day a single piece of poisoned jerky landed in my yard, setting off a chain of events that would expose a multi-million-dollar lie. The first thing you need to know about Bear is that he's less of a dog and more of a four-legged furry Zen master. He's 120 pounds of Bernese mountain dog, with a coat like polished obsidian and eyes that hold the gentle wisdom of an old soul. His bark is a deep, resonant boof he reserves for the mailman, and his idea of a wild time is falling asleep in a sunbeam with his head on my foot. I'm a professional dog trainer, the kind people fly across the country to consult with. My online presence is huge, but in my quiet suburban neighborhood, I was just the guy with the big, fluffy dog. I liked it that way. My home was my sanctuary, a place of peace away from the demands of my career. That peace shattered the day Mr. Davison moved in. His house was a monument to bad taste and new money. It was a sterile white box that looked like a dentist's office had a baby with a shipping container. He drove a Lamborghini that screamed through the quiet streets like a wounded banshee, and his lawn was a chemically treated, unnaturally green carpet where no leaf dared to fall. From day one, he looked at my property, with its slightly overgrown wildflowers and dog-friendly yard, like it was a personal insult. He'd stand on his pristine patio, thin-lipped and dressed in a golf shirt that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, and just glower. The first confrontation was laughably petty. He caught me at the mailbox. "You," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "Your animal. It's a constant disturbance." I glanced back at my house where Bear was, as usual, peacefully napping on the porch. "A disturbance?" I asked, genuinely confused. "He hasn't made a sound all day," Davison sneered. "His presence is the disturbance. It's an eyesore, and the smell, it's uncivilized." I just stared at him. The man lived next to a meticulously cared-for dog, and was complaining about a phantom smell, while his own car spewed noxious fumes every morning. I told him, politely but firmly, that Bear was a well-behaved animal, and was well within his rights to exist in his own yard. That was my first mistake. It was like I'd told a king his crown was crooked. The harassment started small. He'd turn on his high-powered sprinkler system every single time Bear went out to lie in the grass near the property line, deliberately soaking him. Bear, being the good-natured giant he is, would just look confused and move. Then Davison started throwing things over the 6-foot privacy fence. Not garbage, nothing I could immediately complain about. It was clumps of his own manicured lawn clippings, small pebbles from his decorative garden path, things that were annoying but deniable. He wanted a reaction. I refused to give him one. I am a master of controlling canine behavior. I figured I could handle one overgrown toddler. I started documenting everything. I kept a log with dates, times, and descriptions of each incident. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Here I was, a man who teaches an international audience about positive reinforcement and de-escalation, being forced into a cold war with a man-child next door. He clearly saw me as some jobless slob. He once saw me in my work clothes, mud-splattered jeans, and a hoodie covered in dog hair after a session with a particularly anxious rescue, and actually said, "You know, if you took some pride in your property, maybe you could afford something better than that beast." He gestured to Bear. The urge to tell him that Beast had his own line of ethically sourced pet products that probably out-earned his portfolio was immense, but I just smiled tightly and said, "I'll keep that in mind." The game changed when I installed the cameras. They were discreet, high definition, and covered every inch of my backyard. It wasn't just for him. It was for my own peace of mind and the safety of the dogs I sometimes board for special cases. For a week, things were quiet. Davison must have seen them and backed off. I started to hope, stupidly, that it was over, that the simple presence of a lens was enough to make him behave. I should have known better. People like Davison don't see cameras as a deterrent. They see them as a challenge. I was in my home office one afternoon, editing a training video for a client in Japan. On my second monitor, I kept a live feed of the backyard cameras. Bear was dozing under the old oak tree, his favorite spot. I saw Davison step out onto his patio. He wasn't wearing his usual golf attire. He was dressed in workout clothes. He did a few ostentatious stretches, then began pacing along the fence line, glancing around as if to check if anyone was watching. He thought he was being subtle. My stomach tightened. I stopped my work and just watched the feed, my heart starting a low, heavy drumbeat in my chest. He stopped pacing directly opposite from where Bear was sleeping. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It was too small for me to see clearly on the monitor. He looked left, then right, then quickly tossed it over the fence. It landed silently in the grass, just a few feet from Bear's nose. The scent, whatever it was, woke him instantly. Bear lifted his great head, his nose twitching. He stood up, stretched, and ambled over to investigate the new, interesting smell in his yard, and my blood ran absolutely ice cold. It wasn't a pebble. It wasn't a clump of grass. It was a dark, square-shaped piece of what looked like beef jerky, but there was something on it. A faint, almost powdery coating of a sickly blue-green color that glinted unnaturally in the afternoon sun. I didn't shout. I didn't even breathe. My training, all those years of teaching calm, assertive energy, took over. Panic is a predator's best friend. It paralyzes the prey. My world narrowed to a single objective: get to Bear before that poison touched his tongue. I was out of my chair so fast it slammed against the wall. I didn't use the door. I launched myself through the open sliding glass door to my patio, clearing the 3 steps in a single bound. My bare feet hit the grass, wet and cold, but I didn't feel it. Bear, leave it! My voice was a thunderclap, a command honed by thousands of hours of practice. It's a specific tone, not of anger, but of absolute, unquestionable authority. It's the sound that can stop a charging Rottweiler in its tracks. Bear froze, his nose hovering an inch from the tainted jerky. His head snapped up, his ears back, his gentle brown eyes wide with confusion. He'd never heard that voice from me before, not directed at him. He knew it meant the world had tilted on its axis. He whined softly, a low rumble of protest, but he didn't move an inch closer to the meat. He held his position, a statue of perfect obedience, his trust in me overriding his canine curiosity. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I slowed my approach, forcing my body language to be non-threatening. I knelt beside him, my hand gently stroking his massive head. "Good boy," I murmured, my voice shaking slightly. "Such a good boy." Keeping one hand on him, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the emergency training pouch I always wear, even in the house. It contains a pair of latex gloves and several evidence bags, a grim necessity in my line of work, for cases involving abuse or neglect. I pulled on the gloves, my fingers feeling clumsy and slow. With 2 fingers, I picked up the piece of jerky. It was slick, and the blue-green powder came off on the glove. It looked exactly like rat poison. I sealed it in the evidence bag, pressing the air out, my movements deliberate and precise. With Bear safely inside, I walked back to the fence. Davison was gone, of course. The coward had vanished back into his sterile white box. But I knew he was watching. He had to be. He needed to see the result of his handiwork. I walked over to the spot directly beneath one of my cameras. I held up the sealed evidence bag, turning it slowly so the lens could get a perfect, high-definition shot of the poisoned meat inside. I didn't look at his house. I looked directly into the camera lens, my face a mask of cold, controlled fury. I wanted the recording to show not just the evidence, but my absolute certainty. I held it there for a full 10 seconds, an eternity of silent declaration. The message was clear. I have it. I saw you. This is over. Then I went back inside, locked the door, and hugged my dog so tightly he grunted in protest. I buried my face in his thick fur, the scent of him calming my frayed nerves. He was alive. He was safe. The what-if of it all crashed over me in a sickening wave. What if I had been in the bathroom? What if I'd stepped out to get the mail? My gentle, loving friend would be writhing in agony, and I would have been helpless. The quiet rage that had been simmering for months now solidified into something cold and hard and sharp. This wasn't about sprinklers or lawn clippings anymore. This was attempted murder. Mr. Davison had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't just try to kill a dog. He tried to kill the dog of a man who commanded an army of dog lovers and had the best animal law attorney in the state on speed dial. I picked up my phone. "Jessica," I said when she answered. "It's Mark. I've got a situation. It's an escalation. Jessica was my lawyer, a woman who could make a shark feel self-conscious about its teeth. I explained everything, my voice low and even, detailing the prior harassment, the log I kept, the camera installation, and finally the video I had just captured. I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Mark," she said, her voice practically purring. "High-definition video of the act itself? This is not a lawsuit. This is a public execution. Send me the file. I'll run a full background on this neighbor, see what other skeletons we can make dance. What's his name again?" "Davison," I said. "Arthur Davison." I could hear the rapid tapping of her keyboard in the background. For a minute, there was silence, broken only by her occasional, and, "Oh, interesting." I waited, watching Bear, who was now snoring softly on his bed, oblivious to the war I was about to wage in his name. "Mark," Jessica said again, but her tone had changed. It was no longer just sharp and professional. It was stunned. There was a note of genuine disbelief in her voice, something I had never heard from her before. "Are you sitting down? Because you're not going to believe this." I sat. "Go on." "Arthur Davison," she said, drawing out the name. "He's not just some rich jerk in finance or tech. He's the CEO and founder of Naturopause, the giant organic pet food company." She paused for effect, letting the information sink in. "Mark, he's the guy whose face is on every bag of that ridiculously expensive kibble. The guy whose company just spent $50 million on a national advertising campaign with the slogan, 'Naturopause, because your pet is family.'" The silence in my office was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of my computer's cooling fan. Naturopause. The irony was so staggering, so utterly grotesque, it was almost comical. Arthur Davison, the man whose entire public persona was built on the sacred bond between humans and their pets, had just tried to poison my dog with a piece of poison jerky. The hypocrisy was a chasm, deep and dark and bottomless. This wasn't just a personal attack anymore. It was a betrayal of a trust he had manufactured for millions of pet owners. "Jessica," I said slowly, the gears in my head turning, clicking into place. "This changes everything." "You're damn right it does," she shot back, the initial shock in her voice already hardening into razor-sharp strategy. "This isn't a neighborhood dispute with a potential animal cruelty charge. This is a brand-destroying, career-ending 5-alarm corporate firestorm waiting for a match. And Mark, you're holding a freaking flamethrower." We spent the next hour mapping out the initial plan. The first step was to get the jerky analyzed by a private lab. We needed irrefutable proof of the poison and its composition. Jessica had a trusted contact, a forensic toxicologist who owed her a favor. I would overnight the sample under a strict chain of custody protocol. The second step was to do nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was not to confront Davison, not to call the police, not to even look at him if I saw him. He threw a rock into the pond, and we were going to let the ripples disappear. We needed him to think he'd gotten away with it, to let him get comfortable in his arrogance. The video was our trump card, our ace in the hole, and we weren't going to play it until the pot was big enough to bankrupt him emotionally and financially. The next few days were a masterclass in self-control. It took every ounce of my professional training to maintain a neutral facade. I walked Bear on our usual route, deliberately passing Davison's house. I kept my expression placid, my body language relaxed. Bear, magnificent and oblivious, trotted happily beside me, occasionally sniffing at the chemically perfected lawn of the man who'd tried to kill him. I saw Davison watching from his window once, a flicker of movement behind the tinted glass. He was looking for a reaction. Was the dog sick? Was the owner distraught? I gave him nothing. Just a man walking his healthy, happy dog. I could feel his confusion and frustration radiating from the house like heat off asphalt. It was a delicious, chilling feeling. The lab results came back on Thursday. Jessica called me the moment she got the email. "Strychnine," she said, her voice grim. "He used strychnine. A massive dose, too. It wouldn't have just been a peaceful passing, Mark. It would have been brutal. Agonizing convulsions. It's one of the most cruel and inhumane poisons out there. A cold fury, pure and absolute, settled deep in my bones. This wasn't a desperate act. This was calculated cruelty. He hadn't just wanted Bear gone, he had wanted him to suffer. With the lab report, Jessica's team went into overdrive. They weren't just building a lawsuit, they were constructing a fortress. They compiled every ad campaign Natropause had ever run, every schmaltzy interview Davison had given about his childhood golden retriever, Buddy, every keynote speech where he tearfully spoke about pets being our furry children. They dug into his corporate dealings, his board members, his major investors. The man had built an empire on a lie, and we were about to present the public with the receipt. The target wasn't just a man anymore, it was an idea. The idea that a wholesome public image could mask a monstrous reality. My YouTube channel, my social media presence, which I had carefully cultivated to be a source of positive, helpful information, was about to become a weapon. We planned a multi-pronged attack. The lawsuit would be filed first, a quiet little tick on the public court docket. Then, once the papers were served, the real show would begin. I would release a video. Not a rant, not an angry tirade, but a calm, professional, heartbreakingly detailed breakdown of what had happened. It would be titled simply, "My Neighbor Tried to Kill My Dog." I would show Davison's face. I would show the jerky. I would show the lab report. And I would show the high-definition, crystal-clear video of Arthur Davison, CEO of Natropause, the man who believed your pet is family, attempting to murder my best friend. A week after the incident, Jessica gave me the green light. The lawsuit had been filed under seal, scheduled to be made public in 24 hours. The papers were in the hands of a process server. It was time. That evening I sat in my office, Bear sleeping peacefully at my feet, and uploaded the video to my channel. I scheduled it to go live the next morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, prime time for the morning news cycle. I wrote a short, simple description. This is the most difficult video I have ever had to make. Please watch and share. Animal cruelty cannot be tolerated, especially from those who profit from our love for our pets. I hit schedule, and it was done. A digital bomb, armed and waiting. The next morning, I watched the clock. At 8:45 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up to Davison's house. A man in a suit got out, walked to the door, and handed a thick envelope to a very confused-looking Davison. The lawsuit was served. At precisely 9 a.m., my video went live. The immediate explosion was bigger than anything I could have imagined. Within minutes, my phone was vibrating so intensely it was about to fall off the desk. Alerts, comments, shares, emails, all flooding in. Major news outlets were already emailing, asking for interviews. My story was the #1 trending topic on Twitter within the hour. Cause Justice Forbear and Comware Cancel Natropause were everywhere. It was a digital tidal wave. I opened the live feed to my backyard cameras, my heart pounding. I needed to see his reaction. For a long time, there was nothing. Then his patio door slid open with a violent screech. Davison stumbled out, his face not just red with anger, but a mottled, terrifying shade of purple. He was holding his phone, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grip it. He wasn't looking at my house. He was looking up, at the sky, as if he expected the heavens to open up and swallow him whole. He let out a raw, guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage. And then he did something I never expected. He turned and stared directly into my camera lens, his eyes wide with a terrifying manic gleam. He pointed a trembling finger right at the camera, right at me, and his lips formed a single, silent word I could read as clearly as if he'd screamed it. War. His silent declaration of war was pathetic. He was a king screaming in an empty castle while the walls crumbled around him. The war was already over. He just hadn't accepted the terms of his surrender. The video didn't just go viral. It became a cultural event. Every major morning show covered it. Animal rights organizations released scathing statements. Celebrities I'd only ever seen on screen were sharing the video, expressing their disgust, and offering their support. Natropause's stock plummeted so fast they had to halt trading. Their social media pages were a digital wasteland, scorched by an unending barrage of angry comments and one-star reviews. They tried to release a boilerplate statement about an internal investigation, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Jessica was magnificent. She orchestrated the media storm with the precision of a symphony conductor. She granted one exclusive primetime interview to a respected national journalist, and she brought me and Bear with her. I sat there, calm and composed, with Bear's massive, gentle head resting on my knee, and simply told the truth. I recounted the months of escalating harassment, the fear I felt when I saw the poisoned meat, and the profound trust my dog had shown in me. I wasn't an angry victim. I was a professional, a teacher, explaining a case study in human cruelty. And Bear, bless his furry heart, was the perfect co-star. He occasionally licked my hand or sighed contentedly, radiating a zen-like calm that stood in stark contrast to the ugliness of Davison's actions. He was the living, breathing, lovable face of everything that was at stake. The fallout for Davison was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the Natropause Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting. Faced with shareholder revolt, mass boycotts, and the very real threat of the entire company imploding, they did the only thing they could. Arthur Davison was fired, stripped of his title, his CEO position, his seat on the board. He was publicly and humiliatingly excommunicated from the empire he had built on a foundation of lies. The criminal charges followed soon after. The district attorney, smelling a high-profile slam-dunk case, charged him with aggravated animal cruelty, a felony in our state. His pathetic defense that he was just trying to deter a nuisance was laughed out of the courtroom during his arraignment. But for me, the victory wasn't complete. Firing him wasn't enough. A fine and probation wouldn't be enough. I wanted him to understand, on a fundamental level, the world he had tried to harm. Jessica amended our civil suit. We weren't just suing for damages anymore. We were suing for something far more poetic. We demanded a public apology, of course, and a massive financial settlement. But the key condition, the one Jessica fought for with the ferocity of a wolverine, was this: the bulk of the settlement money would not go to me. It would be used to establish a charitable foundation in Bear's name. The Bear Foundation would be dedicated to funding under-resourced animal shelters, sponsoring the training of service dogs for veterans, and providing grants for animal cruelty investigation units across the country. And the final, beautiful, non-negotiable term: Arthur Davison would be legally required to perform 1,000 hours of community service, to be served by cleaning kennels and feeding abandoned animals at the city's largest open intake shelter. He wouldn't be allowed to just write a check and walk away. He would have to look into the eyes of the animals his actions had betrayed. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the threat of a drawn-out public trial that would only further decimate his reputation, he caved. He took the deal. His lawyers tried to spin it as an act of contrition, but everyone saw it for what it was: a total, unconditional surrender. The day the settlement was finalized, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a quiet sense of peace. I took Bear to his favorite spot by the lake, and we sat there for hours watching the ducks. I didn't need the money, and I didn't need the fame. I just needed my dog to be safe. A few months later, I saw a picture online. It was a grainy cell phone photo, leaked by a shelter volunteer. It was Arthur Davison. He was gaunt, his expensive clothes replaced with a janitor's jumpsuit. He was scrubbing a concrete floor in a kennel run, his face a mask of grim resignation. In the kennel, a scruffy, one-eyed terrier mix was watching him, its tail giving a slight, hopeful thump, thump, thump against the chain-link fence. That, to me, was justice. Not the courtroom, not the money, but that single, quiet moment. The man who hated dogs, forced to care for the very creatures he despised, perhaps for the first time in his life being confronted with the unconditional love and forgiveness that they so freely offer. My life and Bear's went back to normal, though our neighborhood was much quieter. The sterile white box next door was sold at a loss to a young family with 2 kids and a happy-go-lucky golden retriever. Bear now has a friend to boof at through the fence. My channel's subscriber count exploded, and I've used the platform to advocate for animal welfare on a scale I never dreamed possible. The Bear Foundation is now fully operational, already saving lives. Sometimes when I'm working in my office, I'll look over at Bear, snoring in his sunbeam, and I'm filled with a profound sense of gratitude. He's more than a dog. He's my partner, my friend, my Zen master. He taught me about patience, about trust, and in the end, about justice. And he did it all without saying a single word.